Hello and welcome to our Good Practice Pod on the inclusion of Indigenous people in volunteering programs. We're going to hear today from the perspective of an organisation that supported Indigenous people as volunteers. We'll also hear from an organisation that's helped to, through volunteering approaches, meet the needs of Indigenous people in Cameroon. And finally, we're going to have a special presentation from a volunteer, Patience Malunga of Norec, who'll talk about her own personal experience of being a volunteer and also being a migrant, the challenges that she faced and how she overcame them. So we're going to have four presentations in this session. First, we're going to hear from Alice Tamang. She is the Indigenous Programs Coordinator of the Australian Volunteers Programme. Next, we're going to hear a joint presentation from Francois Awounkeu and also from Tatiana Palouki, who are the country representative of Cuso International Cameroon. And Tatiana is a South-South volunteer working with Cuso in Cameroon. And finally, we're going to hear, as I mentioned, from Patience Malunga, who's a training advisor with Norec. As ever with the Good Practice Pods, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box and the presenters will respond in the chat box as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Over to you, Alice Tamang of the Australian Volunteers Programme.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me here to present today. So I'm based in Melbourne, Australia, and before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which I'm working from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm really pleased to be speaking with you all to share the details of Indigenous inclusion within the Australian Volunteers Program. The program is an Australian government initiative and it's our national volunteering program working across 26 countries, including the Pacific, parts of Asia and Southern Africa. We've got a long history of Indigenous participation, but over the past 3 years in particular, there's been a definite focus on strengthening the way we approach, design and deliver Indigenous targeted volunteer activities. I think it's really important because for the program to truly represent a broad range of Australian volunteers, Indigenous Australians must be included. It also makes sense because there are a lot of strong connections between the countries we work with internationally and our own communities within Australia. Sometimes there's cultural similarities in the way our families and communities are structured, in the way we connect with and care for country, or in the way we share our knowledge and stories. But there can also be shared challenges such as preventable health issues, law and justice, access to services, and even similar histories of colonisation, segregation and oppression. And I think in some ways that as Indigenous Australians, we also have a unique understanding of development approaches, as we've had over 250 years of development imposed upon us. So we deeply understand the harm that that can cause and the really strong importance of development outcomes being locally led. So within the program, our vision is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and culture are celebrated as an integral part of the Australian Volunteers Program through inclusive, equitable, flexible and strength-based approaches. And essentially what that means is that we're committed to opening up new opportunities and providing more support. So I think the best way for me to share this with you is to talk a bit about the path that we've taken to strengthen inclusion and how that's led us to where we are now. So one of our previous Indigenous targeted volunteer streams ran for a number of years with a partner organisation in South Africa. It started back in 2014 and each year involved a small group of Indigenous Australian volunteers undertaking a 5-week assignment together in country. In 2018, the program conducted a review, which found the assignments had been valued by both the volunteers and the partner organisation, and that we had opportunities to adapt the program, provide some additional support, develop multiple streams and expand into different countries. So following the review, my position was created with the scope of redesigning Indigenous programs so we could build on the strength of what's come before. And the program was really intentional about ensuring the redesign was Indigenous led, because we know that the very best way for Indigenous targeted programs to succeed is to have Indigenous people lead them, to talk with us about what's going to work and to engage with our communities. And this approach was really embedded into the way we proceeded with the design of our new program, Indigenous Pathways. So in 2019, over a number of months, I worked with an Aboriginal consultant, Tony Kiesler, and together we co-designed the new Indigenous Pathways framework. And we looked back on years of Indigenous volunteer feedback, surveys and experiences, as well as conducting consultations. And Tony and I knew it was really important to ensure that the framework can be responsive to different requirements and support needs because our communities are incredibly diverse. Now I'd like to show you this map. I'll just pull it up now. So this is a map of Indigenous Australia. And as you can see, there's hundreds of different Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations. The Torres Strait is just up here. It's the tip of Northern Australia and North Queensland, in between Australia and Papua New Guinea. And then the Aboriginal nations are the rest of the ones on the mainland and down in Tasmania here. So we've all got really different connections to country, cultural practices, beliefs, and languages. So when you think about that in terms of the way Indigenous Australians might engage with the program, it really differs greatly across diversity areas, but also geographically. So with this in mind, we've developed different pathways into volunteering, offering a variety of ways for people to engage with the program. And this can better align with people's family situations, work commitments, and cultural obligations. The first pathway is short-term group assignments aimed as an entry-level point into international volunteering. And this really builds on the strengths of the previous model that I spoke about earlier. The second pathway is medium-term assignments of around 2 to 3 months. And volunteers have the option of being deployed either individually or with a pair, allowing colleagues and community members to undertake an assignment together. And the third pathway is long-term assignments through the broader program, but with tailored support as required. Now, during the context of COVID, we've also introduced remote volunteering online, which has been our primary mode of volunteering during the pandemic. So before I mentioned the strength-based approach as part of the vision, and this is really a crucial part of Indigenous pathways. Assignments must be developed based on a locally identified need in country, but they also need to be aligned to areas of Indigenous strength and expertise so that they're relevant and appealing. So my role is to help identify where there's similarities between Indigenous knowledge and experiences in Australia that can help support the development challenges in the various countries around our region. I have lots of discussions with our in-country teams as well to see what can be a good fit. So a great example of this is a remote group assignment that we're currently developing to connect female Indigenous rangers with Indigenous rangers in Solomon Islands. In Australia, our ancestors have been managing this land for tens of thousands of years, and this knowledge has been handed down through generations. So rangers are using mixes of traditional and contemporary approaches to land and sea conservation. So it's a really excellent area of strength to bring to a volunteer assignment. So the strength-based approach is really important, but it's also essential to be addressing barriers to engagement and ensuring culturally appropriate support mechanisms are embedded throughout all levels of the program. Groups that have a history of being excluded often need a specific invitation to feel comfortable knowing they're welcome to be a part of something. So we've worked on ways to make it very clear that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are welcome. I'll show you this picture up here now. So I've developed a visual identity and it's based on a artwork called Flooding Rivers by an Aboriginal ceramicist, Penny Evans. So we've licensed her artwork and translated it into a digital form, which is now the visual identity for Indigenous pathways. And this is used across all of our documentation and, specific advertising, social media items. And we supplement mainstream program advertising as well to link in with Indigenous media channels. So creating closer ties to community is also a key factor in getting the word out. And engaging with Indigenous community-controlled organisations and peak bodies allows us to reach a wider and more diverse range of Indigenous Australians. We've adapted some of our recruitment processes to build in longer lead times and a bit more flexibility into Indigenous volunteer recruitment. And in terms of ensuring that the program feels culturally safe to Indigenous Australians, there's a few really key things that we've been working on. One of these is to ensure that our staff, not just in Australia, but around the world, have increased and deepened levels of understanding and cultural awareness. So we've developed a range of cultural safety resources that can be shared with staff as well as partner organisations in country. And this includes things like respectful wording guides and online cultural awareness training. Indigenous volunteers themselves might have complex support needs due to varied social, cultural, and economic backgrounds. So taking the time early to ask simple questions about what kind of support someone might need and being flexible can make all the difference. Mainstream program support structures may not always feel safe or culturally appropriate to Indigenous volunteers, which is one of the reasons we've established the Indigenous Volunteer Support and Advisory Panel. It's a formal structure that has the dual role of advising the program broadly on Indigenous participation, as well as providing support, guidance, and mentoring. Now I'll pull up this image so I can show you. So I've got 3 members as part of the panel, and we've all got diverse backgrounds and we're all from different Aboriginal nations. So I'm a Darug woman from eastern part of Australia, and my background is in the arts, education and international development sectors. Clinton is an Adyamatna man from central South Australia, and he's undertaken 3 volunteer assignments, as well as running his own metal fabrication business and mentoring at-risk youth within his community. And Tony is an Aranda man from Central Australia and Far North Queensland, and he's got extensive experience in Indigenous health, program design, monitoring evaluation, and international development. So you can see between us, the 3 of us have quite diverse experience, and that's something we really wanted, so that volunteers can have a range of different people that they can go to for different support or guidance during their assignment. So volunteers can access this panel before, during or after their assignments, so they can build trust and receive consistent support and mentoring throughout their journey. And we can choose to bring panel members into pre-departure briefings or return learning workshops. We've also got a network for Indigenous return volunteers to connect with each other and share stories. And this is headed up by Dimity, who's a former volunteer herself and has mentored others whilst on assignment. The mentoring aspect is a really, really strong feature that we've embedded throughout Indigenous pathways. It's so important, and we've seen some beautiful things come out of it, and can have a really strong impact on people's lives. One of our former volunteers, Tanika, who's a Warramai woman, was working in health administration before her assignment. It's been just over 2 years since she's returned, and she shared with us that volunteering has taught her a great respect for other cultures and deepened the respect she has for her own. She also said it gave her the confidence to pursue further study, and she's now in her first year of studying medicine to become a doctor. Tanika said that without the encouragement of her strong Indigenous mentors, she never would have considered pursuing study in medicine. So all of the things I've just spoken about have taken a really long time to set up, because we knew it was important to get right. But I guess essentially at the heart of it, Indigenous pathways is a really beautiful way of learning and sharing across cultures, bringing First Nations people together and building relationships based on trust and respect. So our next big project is the group assignment for female Indigenous rangers that I mentioned before. And we're really looking forward to seeing the wonderful things that come out of that, both for the volunteers, the partner organisation and their staff. So thank you for your time in listening today, and I hope you enjoyed learning more about the approaches we take at the Australian Volunteers Program.
Thank you for a really great presentation, Alice. It's wonderful to hear a case study of not only how to make volunteering programs more inclusive for Indigenous people, but I think what you set out really is a model for how to make volunteering programs more inclusive for any group who hasn't traditionally been included in international volunteering. So thank you so much for that. Next, we're going to hear a joint presentation from Francois Awounkeu and Tatiana Palouki of Cuso International in Cameroon. Over to you, Francois and Tatiana.
Okay, thank you for giving us the floor to talk about inclusive volunteering in practice for the 2020 International Volunteer Conference. My name is Francois Awounkeu. I'm the Cuso International Country Representative in Cameroon. Because we are talking of inclusive volunteering, I'm here with
Tatiana Palouki, a South volunteer in Cameroon.
Our theme is good practice. My presentation's outline will be, I will let you know more about Cuso International, Indigenous people in Cameroon, the current challenges facing Indigenous people in Cameroon. And then Tatiana will be coming to share with you how we are taking the challenge with the skilled volunteer, Cuso approach and our best practice. And then we will give you the opportunity to share some question and answer with us. What we wanted to tell you about Cuso, we are 60-year-old Canadian-based international volunteer charity organizations. We are committed to ending poverty and inequality around the world. We work with local partners around the world to improve economic opportunity for all. We enhance women and girl empowerment, and then we also advance gender equality. How we do? We mobilize hundreds of skilled professionals who volunteer their time and share their knowledge. We have North-South volunteer, South-South volunteer, online volunteer, and also national volunteer. We currently work in 11 countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean and North America. We also, in Africa, we are in Benin, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, and Tanzania. Coming back to know more about indigenous people in Cameroon, we have 4 groups. Baka inhabiting the southeastern rainforest of Cameroon, and then the northern part of Congo, the northern part of Gabon, and the West and Central Africa Republic of Central Africa Republics. We have also Moro that can be found in the Savannah and the Sahelian area, and also in the grassfield region of Cameroon when we are going to the east, when you are going to the west. Bajali and Bakula are inhabiting the coastal area. When you are in the seaside, you can find out Bajali and Bakula. Bezam, there are very few in number now found in the central region in Cameroon because of the challenges that I will be letting you know. What are the challenges facing indigenous group in Cameroon? We have, they have very low access to the health and education. They will be, has very low participation in the decision making. For now, we don't have some, there are maybe councillors, we are not still to have indigenous people as mayors, deputy, or maybe parliamentarians or senators. They are extremely facing the exploitation and discriminations. They have very low access to justice. They have been forced sedentarization because many of the forests have been given to logging company. They have also the recognition of indigenous people because Cameroon is not right yet. It's not yet ratified the Convention 169, and then the right to self-determination is still a challenge. And then they are also facing a very important problem that are the losses of ancestral land. You know, before they were nomadic, and then today they have been forced to settle. Coming back to the challenges, how we are tackling this, I will give the floor to Tatiana to share with you our best practice. Tatiana.
Thank you very much. When it comes to Cuso's approach on tackling the challenges that affect the indigenous people in Cameroon, we are guided by the human rights principle, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Canadian Feminist International Assistance Policy that is based on human dignity, growth that works for everyone, gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. Then we are also guided by the International Labour Organization, which is Convention 169, the Cameroonian National Development Strategy 2020 and 2030, building on 3 pillars that are people-centered, community anchorage, and partnership. The best practices in Cameroon that we have several activities that we have undertaken. The first activity is that we are fulfilling the right to education of indigenous people through skilled volunteers in partnership with FEDEC. 145 pupils and 13 teachers have been trained on how to deliver extracurricular activities, and strategies have been developed to recruit, maintain, and graduate pupils from primary and secondary schools. The second activity that we have done is that we have helped the Baka community to improve on their livelihood through the sale of handicrafts that were made from 45 material that were collected from barks of trees, the leaves, the non-timber products, and these were exhibited in a trade fair that was organized with the help of the local communities. And through this awareness, people now purchase these artifacts and the community is able to earn a living. In the third activity, this is in partnership with the UNIP Kenya, the country office, where we are restoring the degraded land in the Bajali community. In this wetland region, trees are being planted and the environment has created a very good environment for fish production, which has improved the livelihood of the third activity that we are doing is restoring the degraded land in the Bajali community. And through the partnership with the UNIP Kenya, our country, the third activity that we have done is the restoration of degraded land in Bajali community. This is in partnership with UNIP Kenya country office, which has helped in the planting of trees in the wetland areas. These trees have created a very good environment for fish production, and through the sale of this fish, the people have been able to improve their livelihood. The fourth activity that we are involved in as Cuso International Cameroon is that we are partners in the network, national, and the fourth activity that we have been involved in as Cuso International is that we are a member of the network with the local and international organizations that develop strategies that are all inclusive in implementation of indigenous policies. This has ensured that we have an inclusive program that has been implemented in the country. The fifth activity is that in 2015, through the funds from Global Affairs Canada, we are able to set up the Nkuli Makeli radio station, which is a community radio station. And we had a volunteer in communication who trained 2 radio presenters who are able to give information who are able to educate the community and also to improve the knowledge of the community through the different programs that they have in terms of education, their health, their political issues, and human rights activities. This has given them an opportunity to have full information and to be up to date with the current affairs. The presenter is also the best radio community presenter in Cameroon at the moment. The sixth and the last activity that we have been involved in is the enhancement of the management of indigenous-led communities. Members of these communities have been trained on how to use financial and accounting software, and through this, they are able to account for any funds that have been given to them. And because of their great accountability skills, they have been able to receive more funding that has enabled them to invest in income generating activities in their communities, and this has improved their livelihood. These are some of the activities that we have undertaken as Cuso International Cameroon, and we have contributed to the improvement of indigenous people in Cameroon. Thank you very much, and we are now open for the question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois, and thank you, Tatiana. It's really wonderful to hear about the work that you're doing, tackling the challenges that face Indigenous people in Cameroon and how you're working through volunteers to achieve that. And finally, we're going to hear a special presentation from a volunteer, Patience Malunga of Norec. Over to you, Patience.
Thank you, James. I would like to focus on volunteering and immigration. Myself, I am an immigrant. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and I relocated to Norway in 2015. And as an immigrant in Norway, I have experienced a lot of different things, and I would like to share my experiences and tell my story of how things have been or have worked for me as an immigrant, relocating from a country in the global south and coming to Norway. So I want to give a little bit of background from the context where I come from. I come from African background, where the expectation of the parents is when a child finishes school, they are supposed to get employment. But for me, unfortunately, that was not the case. The kind of employment I got was a volunteering opportunity. This was not something that was well received by my family because they were expecting me to get into a job that actually pays and brings something on the table back home. But for me, that didn't matter if the kind of work I was doing was bringing money or anything like that. What mattered to me was my passion, because what the organization was doing was something that was close to my heart. So I worked as a volunteer in my home country against my wishes of my family, because it is something that I strongly believed in. So for 1.5 years, I worked as a volunteer, and I really enjoyed working as a volunteer. It was when I was volunteering in this organization that an opportunity arose for me to move to Norway to come and work for a Norwegian-based organization. So, of course, when I got this opportunity, my family was happy, and they actually forgot that they were always fighting with me and being against this idea of volunteering. So when I moved to Norway, I was going to come to work for 1 year. And when I finished working, I decided to pursue my studies. And when I was studying, I continued my work as a volunteer. But this was not something that was very common among my friends or among my peers in school, because as a student, you need to also work to have an income and to be able to pay for your rentals and for your food, because I was a self-financed student at that time. But still, in my tight student schedule, I would make time to go and volunteer. But it was something very unpopular among other immigrants because of the demands that we have back home, the expectations, because once you have left home, the expectation is that you are supposed to send back money to support the family, because once you're out of the country, you have money, regardless of what you have gone out of the country to do. So, when you're an immigrant, the black tax on you is so much, this expectation of send money home to, for upkeep, because our structures back home do not really work like structures work here in Europe, that, if someone is not working, they're taking care of the state. We do not have a state that supports people that do not work. So you really need to support your family. So as an immigrant, you find that you are torn in between volunteering or actually going to work your student job. But for me, I always had time to volunteer. So I volunteered for two two organizations in Oslo, whereby whenever they had events, I would find myself at the forefront helping in whatever work they had for me. And in some cases, I would find myself even, missing my shifts for my student job and just trying to go and volunteer, because I believe so much in volunteering. I believed so much that this was my way to integration. And indeed, it really helped me to integrate into the Norwegian society. There were so many things that I picked up while I was a volunteer. So when it came to knowledge base, I found out that I was far more ahead than my other classmates who were just being students and doing their student jobs. For me, I had more knowledge on how the Norwegian society works, on how, how Norwegians behave. So I can say that volunteering can actually be a very good resource to break the culture, to break the ice break, to break the ice of the culture, and to get to understand the people you are, who are surrounding you, and to get to understand the new society and how things work. So in as much as it can be time consuming that you are going to volunteer while you forfeit other roles like doing your paid student job, volunteering is a network opportunity, because for me, when I was volunteering, this is when I got connected to people from other different organizations who also opened up opportunities for me and inviting me to different platforms. It was when I was almost finishing my studies that two of the organizations I was working for, they had job opportunities, and I applied for these jobs, and I equally got, when I applied for the jobs, I got both the jobs. So the other job was an 80% job and the other job was a 100% job. So I ended up going for the 100% job. So it was easy for me as an immigrant to penetrate the job market after finishing my studies, because of the experience that I had volunteering and acquainting myself into the Norwegian society, which was something very difficult for my other peers who were also students like me, who did not volunteer or did not believe in volunteering. So at the end of the day, they were actually surprised how I ended up with two job offers and needing to choose, and them even struggling to know where to send their applications or to get to understand how the job system or the job market in Norway works. So for me, volunteering is beneficial in so many ways, but for immigrants, it can be difficult if you don't have a long side perspective of why am I doing this and what can I potentially get from this. If the focus is on the family demands of trying to send back money home and trying to do A, B, C, D, we can miss on opportunities to integrate and to have a future career prospects by just trying to have a focus on the family demands and the financial demands that are placed on us. So for me, I think as immigrants, volunteering is really, 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 really important because that's the only way to integration into a society. That's the only way to open a career path. That's the only way to get to have connections and networks. And that's the only way to know how many different things work in the society that you are in. Yeah, thank you.
A very sincere thank you, Patience, for sharing your personal story. It's really inspiring to hear how you've overcome obstacles and how you overcome even obstacles before you began to volunteer, and how you personally have benefited from the experience of volunteering. I want to thank all of our 4 speakers today, Alice, Francois, Tatiana, and Patience. It was wonderful to hear from you. This is the second last set of good practice pods for today. So next up, you have the choice between a session on the inclusion of older people in volunteering, and also a session that is going to look at the role of national level volunteering platforms in the Global South in promoting and supporting volunteer efforts. Thank you for joining us. We'll take a 5-minute break now, and then we'll be back with those last 2 sessions. Cheers.